Why, hello there, and welcome once again to the Sage's Library. I am your erstwhile sage, Trevor Devall. Thank you so much for joining me here. And today we're going to be talking about a little game that I've had on my shelf for many years, too many years, so many years, you guys. Oh my God, it's so many years, you guys. It's a game that inspires both love and hate, depending on who is asking. The game that we are going to be talking about today is Palladium Fantasy Role-Playing Game. This is the first edition, or revised edition, technically. This came out, the very first edition came out in 1983. This is the revised edition that came out in 1984, second printing. This is long out of print, and is a beloved collector's item of mine. First of all, you may notice that I pronounce it Palladium, when technically speaking, if you're talking about the mineral or the element, you'd say palladium, and that's true. I've heard many people in the gaming world also call this palladium, but to me that's like nails on a chalkboard. Why? I don't know. I just know that years and years ago, I was introduced to it as palladium, introduced to it actually by myself, because I saw it in a game store as a kid and went, "What's that? That's palladium." And there it stuck. And so I introduced all my friends to it as palladium. Everyone I ever knew who played it called it palladium. So it's Palladium. Now, we're going to be talking just about this game. This was the beginning in a whole host of games created by Kevin Siembieda. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, but love you, Kev. He created a whole range of games with this sort of base system. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, After the Bomb, Rifts, that's the big one everyone talks about, Robotech. We are just limiting our conversation to the base fantasy role-playing game that came out back in 1984. So no mega damage capacity MDC or whatever that was in later editions. Apparently there was a big switch in a lot of things from second edition to first edition. I don't know anything about that because I never used second edition. I used the original, baby, the original, the one and only. I played hundreds of hours of this game. Hundreds of hours of this game. You probably can't see it on the camera, but the pages are all gross. They're all gross because that is soiled pages from constantly flipping through these pages over the years. Literally hundreds of hours of this game. I can't tell you how many sessions this game I played, but it was a lot, including my own crazy homebrew mashup version of the game, which I did years and years and years ago, back in the 90s, which was based on a Viking setting that I created using this as a base system. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but Palladium. Where do we start? Well, first of all, this is one of my favorite types of games in that it has everything you need in this one book. It's got character creation, it's got gear, it's got explanation of combat, obviously, it's got magic, a whole host of really cool magic spells and different styles of magic. It's got a bestiary, it's got the monster manual. It's got a GM section with gods and all kinds of maps and setting information, and of course an introductory adventure. So just like my favorite games of yore, like Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay First Edition, all you need to play this game is this book and a way to work through the oddly written rules, because they are odd. In fact, the rules are so odd that I didn't actually know how to properly run a combat in this game ever. I still don't. In fact, I was rereading it today, the combat section, and going, this doesn't make any sense to me. I'll talk a little bit more about how that worked for us. But basically, if you guys have any experience with this game, and you figure you've got a good handle on how combat works, I'd love to hear about it in the comments after you hear what I have to say about how we did combat, because I'm pretty sure our version was pretty gonzo and not at all how Kevin intended it. Now, the other thing I should say about this game is that it is one of the original D&D fantasy heartbreakers. Now, what does that mean? Well, you old gamers out there know what that term means, heartbreakers. But what it means is, way back in the midst of time when D&D was still new, as in, early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, the term fantasy heartbreaker basically meant that some guy loved playing D&D, but there was a few elements in it he didn't like. So he changed one or two little things and then released that as a published game, as a super awesome, totally separate, way better than D&D. But in fact, it was just kind of D&D, but with a few little house rules. That's kind of what a fantasy heartbreaker was. And that is what Palladium is. Now, that's not an insult at all. Like I said, I wouldn't have spent hundreds of hours of my life on this game if I thought it was crap. It certainly is not. I mean, some of you out there probably think it is, but that's okay. That's okay. It's a big world and everybody has their own opinions. But this is definitely one of the original fantasy heartbreakers. This game very much reads like someone who looked at D&D and said, I don't like how they do alignment. I don't like how they do magic. I don't like how they do character classes. Why don't characters have skills? And so we get this game in response to it. Now, I quite like this game. This game is both class and level based and skill based, which is kind of new. You know, well, I shouldn't say new, because back in these days, there was still Rollmaster and MERPs. They were class and level and skill based. So it's not like it was, you know, breaking any barriers or anything. But the way they did it, I quite liked it. You had a lot of control over what you wanted your character to be. Yes, you were still locked into what they call an OCC, an occupational character class, but you had a lot of freedom in terms of what skills you wanted to pursue, what secondary skills you wanted to pursue, how you wanted to round out your character that way. So it was pretty cool. Now, the other thing that really, really smacks of fantasy heartbreaker about this game is the alignment system. So I, like a lot of people back in the 80s, spent a lot of time sitting around talking with our friends about which alignments we would be in real life. Oh my God, you're so chaotic neutral. I am not. I'm totally lawful evil. Oh, no way. You're like law. You're like neutral good, if anything. I don't know if the rest of you did that. Just wasted a lot of hours doing that, but we certainly did. So when this game came out, it had a totally different way of approaching alignment. Gone were the axes of law and chaos and good and evil. No, that was all gone. It was just either you were a version of good, a version of selfish, because Kevin is very specific in this book to talk about how there's no such thing as neutral, or you were a version of evil. Interestingly, there were 2 different good alignments, 2 different selfish alignments, and 3 different evil alignments. So perhaps that was an indication as to what the focus of the game might be, but it depends. I just thought it was a really interesting thing. Instead of chaotic evil, you would have diabolical, which basically meant the same thing. But then you would have something like aberrant. Aberrant? I think I always said aberrant, but I'm pretty sure it's aberrant. I was a bit of a stupid kid. Aberrant alignment is where you're evil, but you're kind of like, you still have a sense of honor. You're Darth Vader evil, basically. So anyway, really, really interesting take that we had never seen before. And that was like, oh, wow, that's cool. Now, there are 20 playable character classes in this game alone. They break them up basically into men of magic, men of arms, which is a nice kind of throwback to original D&D, and clergy. So you've got your fighters and your paladins and your rangers and thieves, but you've also got your wizards, and you've got your summoners and your diabolists and your alchemists and stuff. I have to say the magic system in this game was a huge and welcome change from everything we had seen in D&D at that time, because I was never a big fan of the Vancian system where you had to memorize spells in advance, and then once you cast them, you somehow forgot them. And it just never made any sense to me, and I never enjoyed it. But this game said, no, it doesn't work like that. If you're a wizard, you have so many spells per day of various levels. It's totally up to you to determine what spells those are going to be. You use your spells like you would any other ability, right? Except that you've only got so many per day. So very, very interesting for its time. Now it doesn't seem particularly groundbreaking, but at the time that was really cool. And I was like, oh, wow, I really love that. And then they had summoning magic where you drew circles in silver dust and summoned demons and whatever you wanted basically to do your bidding. And then you had the Diabolists, which were all about rune magic and carving things on stones. And it was just really cool, really, really a different approach to anything that D&D had to offer in our circles at that time. So that was really cool. Now the combat system, I love and hate this combat system. I love it because it's a little more simulationist than what D&D was. You still have hit points, you still roll a d20, you still add your bonuses to hit. But in this game, basically if you roll 4 to 20, you hit. Right? So people almost never miss, except that the defender has a chance to parry or dodge. which is good. I like that. For those of you who are watching my current season 3 of the main show, Me, Myself, and Die Dominion, I use Dominion rules. And of course, that is an option in combat. You can devote some of your activity to defending yourself, which I quite like. But the thing is, now this may be embarrassing for me to admit, but we didn't really understand how it worked. Now that sounds crazy. It seems obvious, right? Well, you've got a mercenary fighter. He's got 3 attacks per round. Great. Except that when you looked at the combat charts, not only did you have pluses to strike and parry with, say, a sword. Oh, of course I can parry with my sword. But you also had it for shields. And that led us to think, now hold on a second. If I can strike with a shield, then is that part of my melee attack? And therefore, does 1 attack per melee mean 1 attack with each arm? No, we were quite young. So, don't be too harsh on us. We were trying to figure this stuff out, okay? So what that led to in later stages of the game was if a guy had 3 attacks, that meant he came in with 3 attacks with the sword and 3 shield bashes or whatever he had. So now he basically had 6 attacks coming in. Now you could parry it, and you had 6 parries as well if you were a man of arms. If you weren't a man of arms, you had like the lone 1 parry and you're in big trouble. But that's how we did it. And it was a real crazy dice fest. In fact, it kind of turned this game into a dice pool game. It was never intended to be a dice pool game. You're rolling like a handful of D20s. Oh my God, that one's a crit and this one's... Anyway, super fun. We did it totally wrong, but we enjoyed the heck out of it. Now, I mentioned before that I developed a Viking setting to use with this game, which I ran, again, hundreds of hours of. Super fun, so great. But it was the first time I had introduced my players to the sandbox idea. So up to that point, our group had been very used to the idea of, ultimately you're kind of playing through a story and there's a plot and the GM has an idea. And, I GM'd like that at the time. All my friends GM'd like that at the time. We didn't really understand that it didn't have to be that way. But when I started running this Palladium game for my friends, I adopted kind of a sandbox style where now you no longer had plot armor, where now you were just some guy and you had to think smart, you had to think tactically, because just because you were the main character didn't mean anything. You could drop dead if you did the wrong thing. This was revelatory to us. And to my players who couldn't believe that, oh my God, I just lost 3 characters in this dungeon. And I laughed and laughed and laughed at them. But my players learned how to think tactically, and that changed our whole method of play. That changed everything about our game. Now, I'm not giving Palladium credit for this. That could have been done with any game system. It just so happened to coincide with my running of Palladium. So when I look at this game, that's my memory is, when I taught my players how to be in a sandbox and how to die horribly. They didn't all die, of course. Some of them went on to be some of the most memorable and beloved characters that they ever had. So super cool. This is a beloved game that will always have an honored place on my shelf here in the Sages Library. I look at this thing and I just have so many fond memories of this game, despite its not exactly clearly written rules and despite its sort of mad assumptions about a few things. But would I run this game today? Probably not. But I might. That's the thing. Every time I look at any of these games on this shelf, I always think, oh, I want to run that. I want to run that again. I want to run that again. And today, even when I was preparing for this video, I was going through this book going, oh, I remember you. Oh, we had some times, you and me. Let's have some times again. Come on, let's ride off into the sunset together. Hey, oh. But no, probably not. Anyway, that's the Palladium role-playing game, and that is the end of this episode of the Sages Library, so thank you so much for joining me. And I do encourage you to like and subscribe if you enjoy the content here, and as well, don't forget to check out my new season of the main show on Me, Myself, and I, Dominion. Thank you. We will see you next time.